They called it a quarterly update meeting. That's what showed up on my Outlook calendar anyway. Just another Wednesday morning gathering in Apex Defense Solutions' glass conference room, complete with overpriced coffee and the usual corporate theater. The moment I walked in, something felt wrong. 2 cameras were set up in the back, pointing straight at the podium. You know that feeling when you walk into a room and everyone stops talking? This was worse. I'm Tom Anderson, 55 years old, and I've been building security systems for this company longer than most of these people have been writing code. Back when cybersecurity meant something more than installing antivirus software and calling it a day. Charles Richardson, our CEO, stood there in his $1,000 suit, looking like he was about to deliver the performance of his life. Charles is 36, MBA from Wharton, and he's always been the type who thinks experience is just another word for outdated. But this felt different, more final. I took my usual seat in the 3rd row, same spot I'd occupied for the past 5 years, since they moved me out of my basement lab. Around me, engineers and project managers shuffled in with their tablets and smartphones. Most of them young enough to be my kids. Hell, Emma, my 19-year-old daughter, probably knows more about their programming languages than I do these days. But they don't know what I know about keeping systems truly secure. At 55, you start thinking about things differently. Like how I've got maybe 10 years left before retirement, assuming my 401k doesn't tank again. The mortgage on the house still has 6 years to go, $2,100 a month that doesn't care how old I am. And Emma's Stanford acceptance letter is sitting on my kitchen table with a price tag of $45,000 per year. That's $180,000 total, money I promised her she wouldn't have to borrow. Charles cleared his throat and the room went quiet. After careful consideration, he began, his voice carrying that practiced corporate tone. We've determined that Tom Anderson is no longer aligned with Apex's future direction. It took a second for my name to register. The coffee in my stomach turned to acid. He wasn't looking at me. He was performing for the cameras, for the board members watching the live stream, for the investors who'd been breathing down his neck about the upcoming $650 million merger with Pinnacle Capital. 30 years of work. 30 years of late nights, weekend calls, and systems that never failed on my watch. Reduced to one sentence delivered into a microphone for public consumption. You know what really gets me? I'd seen this coming. The writing was on the wall when they started hiring all these 25-year-old hotshots with their computer science degrees and their talk about agile methodology and disruptive innovation. They looked at guys like me and saw dead weight. I sat there, back straight, keeping my face neutral. Around me, a few people started that awkward courtesy clapping you do when you're not sure what's appropriate. Others stared at their phones, uncomfortable with the spectacle. I wasn't going to give them the satisfaction of seeing me break down. Here's what Charles and his executive team didn't understand about the system I'd built for them. It wasn't just some standard corporate security setup you could replace with an off-the-shelf solution. Over the past 15 years, I designed a 4-layer verification framework that protected every major contract Apex signed. Layer 1 handled basic authentication, usernames, passwords, the basic stuff any kid fresh out of college could manage. Layer 2 managed legal compliance, making sure every signature was from someone authorized to sign. Layer 3 verified financial authorization, checking that the dollar amounts matched approved budgets. And Layer 4, my personal edition, included AI-enhanced blockchain verification that only I could authorize. I'd learned this approach during my 12 years with the NSA, working on classified systems where one mistake could compromise national security. When Apex started landing government deals, I made sure we had the same level of protection. Every contract, every merger document, every major agreement had to pass through all 4 layers. Remove any layer, and the whole system would lock down until the issue was resolved. Charles had no idea he'd just fired the one person who could complete his precious merger. After the meeting, I walked to my desk like I was just grabbing lunch. My workspace looked exactly the same, organized, methodical, everything in its place. The same coffee-stained mouse pad I'd been using for 8 years. The same photo of my Chevy Silverado from the company parking lot picnic. And on the corner sat a photo of Emma at her high school graduation holding up her acceptance letter to Stanford. The kid's brilliant with computers, way beyond anything I ever understood. The photo reminded me why I'd worked so hard, why every late night and weekend call had been worth it. Jim Walsh, our head of security, appeared beside my desk. He's a good guy. Someone I'd personally recommended for the job 8 years ago when he was just a young father trying to provide for his family. Now he had the uncomfortable job of escorting me out. "Tom, I'm sorry," he said quietly. "This isn't right. They're making a huge mistake." I nodded. "Just do your job, Jim. You've got a family to think about. Mortgage payments don't care about principles." We walked toward the exit together, past colleagues who suddenly found their keyboards fascinating. A few met my eyes with apologetic looks, but most avoided eye contact entirely. The sound of my footsteps echoed in the too quiet office. At my age, you realize how few real friends you have at work. Most relationships are just convenience, people being polite because they have to see you every day. At the glass doors, Jim paused before scanning his badge. "They don't deserve what you built for them," he said. "Take care of yourself." "Jim," I replied, keeping my voice steady. The doors opened with their familiar mechanical hiss. Cool Austin air rushed in from the parking lot, carrying the smell of car exhaust and barbecue from the food truck down the street. I stepped through without looking back. What I carried with me was heavier than any briefcase. The knowledge that Apex's entire merger depended on systems I'd built, layer by careful layer. That evening, I sat in my living room watching Austin move on without any awareness of what had just happened at Apex Defense Solutions. My phone sat silent on the table. No calls, no messages, no emergency alerts from the system. But I knew it was only a matter of time. That evening, I sat in my living room, the familiar quiet settling around me. Emma was at study group, preparing for her computer science midterms in her freshman year at Stanford. The kid had no idea her old man had just become unemployed. At 55, getting fired isn't like being 30 and bouncing back. Companies see your resume and think liability, health insurance costs, training someone who might retire in 15 years. They want digital natives, not guys who remember when networking meant something other than LinkedIn. I made myself a cup of coffee and sat by the window. Outside, delivery trucks rumbled past, dogs barked, and life carried on. For the first time in 30 years, corporate chaos wasn't my problem to solve. 3 days. That's how long it took for Charles's confidence to crack. I was finishing my morning coffee, thinking about updating my LinkedIn profile and wondering if anyone would hire a 55-year-old systems engineer when my phone buzzed. Apex's executive line. Charles himself was calling, probably from his corner office with the city view he loved to show off during board meetings. I let it ring once, twice, 3 times. Then I set the phone down and watched it vibrate against the kitchen table like an angry insect. The irony hit me. 3 days ago, he'd treated me like dead weight in front of the entire company. Now, in his panic, I was suddenly essential again. When the call finally dropped to voicemail, I waited a minute before pressing play. His voice came through the speaker, but it wasn't the commanding tone he'd used on stage. This was raw, desperate. "Tom, pick up please, we've got a situation here. The merger documents won't clear without your authorization code." Legal's breathing down my neck, and Pinnacle's executives are asking questions every hour. "I need you to call me back. We can work something out. Just call me. Work something out." That was Charles's language for when the walls were closing in. He never begged until things went sideways. I deleted the voicemail and went back to my coffee. Outside, delivery trucks rumbled past, and life carried on. For the first time in 30 years, corporate chaos wasn't my headache. The calls kept coming. First from Charles, then from Rebecca Foster at the law firm handling the merger. Rebecca and I had worked together on dozens of contracts over the years. She was sharp, professional, usually respectful. But when I finally answered her call on the second day, desperation had made her forget our history. "Tom, this is just a formality," she said, her voice strained but trying to sound casual. "We need your digital signature to finalize the documents. Nothing complicated, just routine authorization. You know how these systems work." Formality. The same word Charles had used when he announced my firing. "Just a formality," he'd said, like 30 years of service was nothing more than paperwork. "Rebecca," I said, keeping my tone level, "I know better than anyone what's at stake here. I built the framework. Your contracts are trapped inside a system that won't bend to pressure or legal tricks. I know exactly why everything's frozen, and it's not a formality." Silence stretched between us. The kind lawyers hate. Silence that means they're losing control. "Surely you understand the risk of letting this collapse," she said carefully. "The jobs at stake, the shareholders, the economic impact." I almost laughed. Where had their concern been when Charles paraded my dismissal like a trophy? Where had it been during all those late nights when I worked alone to keep their deals from falling apart? And where was their concern about my job, my mortgage, Emma's college fund? "I won't be signing anything," I said. "Not today, not ever." "You want to talk about jobs at stake? I just lost mine after 30 years. Good luck figuring out your authorization problem." The next morning brought news that Apex's stock had dropped 15 points overnight. The financial networks were calling it a procedural delay. But markets don't lie. When confidence takes a hit, numbers fall. The system I'd built was speaking louder than any press release Charles could issue. Then came the anonymous message. I found it in my personal email that evening, the subject line blank, sender address routed through multiple relays. The body contained one line: "They need you more than they think." The other side knows it too. The message could be from Alex Rivera from IT, someone who'd always understood the technical side of what I'd built. The message was followed by another, the next day. "Charles doesn't hold the key. You do. Pinnacle Capital knows it. Check the business news." That hit me like cold water. I pulled up the financial websites on my laptop. Buried in the merger coverage was a quote from an unnamed Pinnacle executive. "Certain technical authorizations remain outstanding. We're evaluating all options." They weren't fooled by Charles's performance. They recognized that I, not his board or his lawyers, was the real gatekeeper. The $650 million merger depended on authorization that only I could provide. And I was sitting in my kitchen in sweatpants, unemployed, with no intention of helping any of them. By the end of the week, the whispers had become headlines. Apex's stock continued sliding as investors realized the routine delay was anything but routine. The merger documents remained unsigned, frozen in a system that wouldn't bend to pressure. I watched it unfold from my living room, financial news playing in the background while I sorted through job listings. At my age, most postings might as well say, "No one over 40 need apply." They use code words: digital native, startup mentality, high energy environment. Translation: we want someone young who will work 80-hour weeks for peanuts. The unemployment benefits would kick in next week. $420 per week, which barely covers groceries. Thank God I'd been putting extra toward the mortgage principal. Still, doing the math was sobering. My savings could cover about 8 months of expenses if I cut everything to the bone. That's when Charles made his biggest mistake. Desperate to salvage the situation, he announced that his legal team had found a technical workaround that would bypass the authorization requirements. He stood behind the same podium where he'd fired me, promising investors that full clearance would happen within 24 hours. I watched the press conference from my kitchen table, laptop open, eating a peanut butter sandwich because I was already cutting back on expenses. Charles looked confident, even triumphant, as he assured the cameras that the merger was back on track. The stock ticked upward slightly, not much, but enough for desperate investors to cling to hope. He had no idea what was coming. You see, when I built that system, I didn't just create verification layers. I built in something else. An AI learning algorithm that would recognize and flag any attempt to circumvent the authorization process. Call it professional paranoia, but after 12 years working classified systems, you learn to assume someone's always trying to hack your work. The next day, reports started trickling out on the financial websites. Apex's legal team had attempted to input their bypass code into the merger platform. At first, everything seemed fine. Documents loaded, systems appeared to accept the input. For a few hours, Charles and his board probably celebrated, convinced they'd pulled off a rescue. But then the AI failsafe triggered. Every unauthorized signature, every false credential was detected and flagged. The system didn't just reject the attempt, it cascaded through every copy of the files, freezing them permanently and rendering all versions invalid. The entire contract, in every iteration, was dead. I pictured the scene. Lawyers staring at screens full of red warning messages. IT staff scrambling to understand what had gone wrong. Board members watching their $650 million deal evaporate in real time. And Charles finally understanding that his performance had just crashed into an immovable wall. The stock plummeted again, erasing the brief bump and then some. News outlets that had praised his innovative solution that morning pivoted sharply by evening, highlighting the complete collapse with merciless detail. My phone started buzzing with texts from former colleagues. "Tom, did you do this?" one asked. "They're saying it's a security feature you built. Is that true?" I didn't respond. Let them figure it out themselves. That evening, my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. New York area code. Pinnacle Capital's headquarters. "Mr. Anderson." The voice was calm, measured, nothing like the desperation I'd been hearing from Apex. "This is Brian Matthews, COO at Pinnacle Capital." I waited, curious to hear what the other side had to say. "I'll be direct," he continued. "The contract cannot proceed without your authorization. Our technical team has confirmed that without your signature, the entire agreement is invalid. Our board has suspended all forward activities indefinitely." The honesty was refreshing. No threats, no manipulation, just recognition of reality. "They underestimated you," Matthews said quietly. "Apex, I mean. They treated you like overhead when you're actually the cornerstone. We've been watching this situation develop, and frankly, we're impressed by the elegance of your security architecture." I found myself leaning forward. "What exactly are you saying?" "I'm saying we recognize talent when we see it, and we recognize that Apex just made the biggest personnel mistake in corporate history. The conversation that followed changed everything." Matthews explained that Pinnacle had been evaluating not just Apex's financials, but their technical infrastructure. My security system was one of the main assets they'd wanted to acquire. Without it, and without me, the merger made no sense. "We're prepared to make you an offer," he said. "Chief Security Officer, $195,000 base salary, full benefits, and equity options. You'd be building security systems for a company that actually understands their value." I sat there in my kitchen, unemployed for 2 weeks, looking at unemployment forms and job listings that basically told me I was too old to matter. And here was a $195,000 offer to do exactly what I'd been doing, except for people who appreciated it. "There's one condition," Matthews added. "We need to know that the Apex situation is permanently resolved, that there's no chance of reconciliation." I thought about Charles's desperate phone calls, about 30 years of being taken for granted, about being fired on camera like some kind of corporate entertainment. "Mr. Matthews," I said, "that bridge isn't just burned, it's ash." 2 days later, federal agents were executing search warrants at Apex's offices. It turned out the merger collapse had triggered something bigger, a federal investigation into financial irregularities that my security system had been flagging for months. The same system designed to protect legitimate contracts was now exposing illegitimate ones. Agent Sarah Collins from the FBI Financial Crimes Division called me the next morning, professional, direct, asking technical questions about the security framework and how it might have been compromised. I met her at a downtown coffee shop. Nothing dramatic, just two people talking over mediocre coffee and stale pastries. "We're seeing patterns that suggest systematic contract manipulation," she said, sliding a tablet across the table. "Payments to shell companies, backdated authorizations, routing through offshore accounts. Your AI system flagged all of it over the past 18 months. The irony was perfect. Charles had fired me for refusing to compromise the system's integrity. Now that same integrity was exposing his crimes. "We'd like you to consult on the technical analysis," Collins continued. "Help us understand what the system detected and when. The pay is $125 per hour, and given the complexity of this case, we're looking at several months of work. At $125 an hour, working even part-time would more than cover my expenses, while I figured out the Pinnacle offer. Better yet, the work felt meaningful, using my skills to expose corruption instead of enabling it. The security architecture I'd built wasn't just protecting legitimate contracts, it was creating an evidence trail of illegitimate ones. Within 2 weeks, federal agents were executing search warrants at Apex's offices. Computers seized, files impounded, executives lawyering up. The $650 million merger became the least of Charles's problems as money laundering and fraud charges materialized. The business news coverage was brutal. Defense contractor under federal investigation. CEO facing fraud charges. Merger collapse triggers criminal probe. I wasn't just a witness anymore. I was the guy who'd built the system that caught them. Every news article mentioned the sophisticated AI-enhanced security architecture that had detected the irregularities. They didn't use my name, but everyone in the industry knew who designed Apex's systems. That's when other companies started calling, not just Pinnacle, but their competitors too. Word spreads fast in the defense contractor world, especially when someone builds something that actually works. By the end of the month, I had 3 job offers, all north of $180,000, all from companies that suddenly understood the value of uncompromised security systems. Emma was in the kitchen doing calculus homework when I accepted Pinnacle's offer. The kid looked up from her textbook when I hung up the phone. "Good news?" she asked. "Very good news, sweetheart. Looks like your Stanford tuition just got a lot easier to handle." Her grin was worth everything I'd been through. 4 months earlier, I'd been worried about paying for her education. Now I was looking at a salary that would cover tuition, eliminate the mortgage, and maybe even let me think about retiring comfortably instead of working until I dropped. "Dad, you're actually smiling," Emma said. "I haven't seen you do that since Mom died." That hit me. My wife Sarah had passed 3 years ago from cancer, and since then, work had been my escape. Maybe getting fired was the push I needed to remember what actually mattered. The final chapter came 18 months later. Charles Richardson was sentenced to 7 years in federal prison for money laundering and defense contract fraud. The judge specifically mentioned how the AI security system had provided irrefutable evidence of systematic financial crimes. Apex Defense Solutions filed for bankruptcy. Its assets sold off to pay creditors and legal fees. The employees who'd sat in silence during my humiliation were scattered to new jobs, many struggling to explain the gap in their resumes when potential employers asked about the federal investigation. Jim Walsh landed on his feet. I'd recommended him to Pinnacle's security team, and he was doing well. But a lot of others weren't so lucky. I wasn't thinking about revenge as I sat in my new office at Pinnacle, designing security systems that actually protected what they were supposed to protect. The work was challenging. The team respected experience over youth, and nobody questioned whether a 55-year-old engineer could keep up with technology. They cared about results, not age. Emma started her sophomore year at Stanford that fall, debt-free and proud of her old man. When her friends asked what I did for work, she'd tell them I built systems that couldn't be broken or bypassed. "My dad's like a digital locksmith," she'd say, "but for the good guys." The house was paid off by Christmas. The 401k was back on track. And for the first time since Sarah died, I was thinking about the future instead of just surviving day to day. Pinnacle had already mentioned promotion opportunities, maybe running the entire cybersecurity division in a few years. My FBI consulting work wrapped up after 8 months, but Agent Collins stayed in touch. The case had become a model for how AI-enhanced security systems could detect financial crimes in real time. Other agencies were asking for similar implementations. "You built something that changed how we investigate white-collar crime," she told me during our final debrief. "The patterns your system caught would have taken us years to find manually." That evening, I deleted the last voicemail from Charles's final desperate call. I didn't need to hear it again. The silence that followed said everything I needed to know about how that chapter of my life had ended. Sometimes, the best revenge is simply building something so solid that the truth has no choice but to rise to the surface. And sometimes, just sometimes, the system works exactly the way it should. When companies value loyalty and experience, when hard work gets recognized, when doing the right thing actually pays off. You know what I learned? At 55, getting fired isn't the end of your career. Sometimes it's the beginning of the one you should have had all along. The industry magazines started calling me for interviews about cybersecurity best practices. Conference organizers wanted me to speak about AI-enhanced fraud detection. Suddenly I wasn't just Tom Anderson, the guy who got canned. I was Tom Anderson, the architect who built the system that brought down a major defense contractor's criminal operation. Emma called me from Stanford last week. She's thinking about switching her major from computer science to cybersecurity. "I want to build systems like you, Dad," she said. "Systems that actually protect people." I told her that sounded like a pretty good plan to me. Sitting here now, 2 years after that Wednesday morning in the conference room, I can honestly say Charles Richardson did me the biggest favor of my professional life. He just didn't know it at the time. The security system I built didn't just bring down a $650 million deal. It brought down the right people for the right reasons. And sometimes that's all the justice you need.